For 6 months, I poured my life into a project that was set to redefine our company. The day it was presented, my manager took all the credit and got the promotion I had earned. So I waited. And at the annual conference, in front of 5,000 people, I took the stage and exposed him live. My name is Chloe Reid, and I've been a data analyst at TechCorp Industries for 4 years. I'm not the type who thrives at office happy hours or schmoozes with executives in the hallway. I show up, I do brilliant work, and I go home. Numbers speak to me in a way that people often don't. Give me a complex data set and a problem to solve, and I'm in my element. Ask me to play corporate politics, and I'd rather stick pins in my eyes. That's probably why I didn't see the betrayal coming until it was too late. My manager, David Chen, was everything I wasn't. Where I was quiet and methodical, David was loud and flashy. He'd walk into meetings with perfectly styled hair, designer suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and a vocabulary full of words like synergy, leverage, and disruptive innovation. The executives loved him. He had that special gift of making empty statements sound profound. I'd sit in meetings listening to him say things like, "We need to think outside the box to create a paradigm shift in our vertical," and wonder how anyone took him seriously. But they absolutely did. David had been my manager for 2 years, and in that time, I'd watched him take credit for work that wasn't his, at least a dozen times. 6 months ago, my colleague Marcus spent weeks developing a new reporting template that cut our analysis time in half. At the department meeting, David presented it as his own idea and got praised by our director. Marcus was furious, but he didn't say anything. 3 months before that, David took my suggestion for restructuring our client database and pitched it to upper management as his strategic vision. I got a generic thank you email. He got a bonus. That's how David operated. He collected the brilliance of others like trophies and displayed them as his own achievements. The man couldn't write a line of code to save his life. I once saw him struggle for 10 minutes trying to open a CSV file in Excel. But none of that mattered, because David had mastered the art of managing upward. He knew exactly what to say to make executives feel like he was the genius behind every success our team produced. I learned to live with it. That was my mistake. Everything changed last November when I had an idea that would become Project Chimera. I'd been studying our company's market prediction models and noticed something troubling. We were constantly 3 to 6 months behind actual market shifts. By the time our analytics told us a trend was happening, our competitors had already adapted. We were losing millions in missed opportunities. One night, working late after everyone else had gone home, I started thinking about the problem differently. What if instead of analyzing historical data to predict the future, we could create a model that learned from real-time market signals across hundreds of different data sources simultaneously? The idea consumed me. I started working on it in every spare moment I had. I'd get to the office at 6 in the morning and stay until midnight. I worked through weekends. I canceled plans with friends. My sister stopped inviting me to family dinners because she knew I'd either skip them or spend the whole time on my laptop. I didn't care. This project was the most exciting thing I'd ever worked on. The technical challenges were immense. I had to build a system that could pull data from social media trends, economic indicators, consumer behavior patterns, weather events, political developments, and dozens of other sources. Then I had to create an algorithm sophisticated enough to identify meaningful patterns in all that noise. The machine learning model alone took me 3 months to develop. I taught myself 2 new programming languages just to build the features I needed. I called it Project Chimera because it combined so many different elements into one cohesive system. Like the mythological creature made of different animals. When I first mentioned the project to David in passing, he barely looked up from his phone. This was back in December when I was still in the early stages. I'd excitedly explained the concept during our one-on-one meeting, thinking he might want to allocate some official resources to help me develop it. He'd nodded along, clearly not understanding a word I was saying, and told me it sounded like a interesting side project, but not to let it distract me from my regular responsibilities. He actually used the phrase, "Don't waste too much time on theoretical exercises." So I kept working on it alone, on my own time, using my own equipment. By March, I had a working prototype. I ran it through 6 weeks of backtesting against historical data, and the results were stunning. My model predicted major market shifts with 87% accuracy. Our existing system averaged 43%. This wasn't just an improvement. This was revolutionary. This was the kind of innovation that made careers and changed companies. I was so proud, I could barely contain myself. That's when I made my second mistake. I showed it to David. It was a Friday afternoon in April. I'd requested a meeting and brought my laptop to his office. I walked him through the entire system, demonstrating how it worked with live data. I showed him the back-testing results. I explained how implementing this company-wide could give us a competitive advantage worth hundreds of millions of dollars. For the first time since I'd known him, David was actually paying attention. I watched his eyes get wider as he scrolled through my presentation. He asked me to send him all the files, all the documentation, everything. I did. I sent him 6 months of my life's work in a single email. The next Monday, David called me into his office and told me he wanted to present Project Chimera to the executive board. He said my work was impressive, but that this kind of high-stakes presentation needed someone with executive presence. He promised I'd get full credit for the technical development. He just wanted to help me by handling the business strategy side and the presentation itself. He made it sound like he was doing me a favor. He said executives would have tough questions about implementation, costs, and risk management, things that I wasn't equipped to handle. He said he would make sure my contributions were recognized, but that he needed to be the face of the project to give it the best chance of approval. I believed him. God, I actually believed him. The presentation was scheduled for the last week of April. The night before, I stayed up until 3 in the morning preparing. I created a detailed slide deck explaining the methodology, the technology, the projected impact. I prepared answers to every possible technical question. I printed out supporting documentation. I was ready. That morning, I put on my best suit, the navy one I'd bought for job interviews years ago. I practiced my opening remarks in the bathroom mirror. I got to the conference room 30 minutes early. The executive board was already there, including our CEO, Jennifer Martinez. David arrived 15 minutes late, breezing in with his usual confidence. He sat down next to me and leaned over. I can still remember the smell of his cologne, something expensive and overpowering. "Chloe, slight change of plans," he whispered. "I'm going to handle the presentation. These board meetings can be intimidating, and we need to nail this. Don't worry, you're still my secret weapon if they get too technical." Before I could respond, he'd opened his laptop and pulled up my slides. My slides. The ones I'd spent all night perfecting. He started the presentation. I sat there, frozen, as David presented 6 months of my work as his own vision. He talked about his innovative approach and his breakthrough methodology. He clicked through slides showing code I'd written, algorithms I'd designed, results I'd generated. When he got to the technical sections, he glossed over them quickly, focusing instead on vague business impacts and market opportunities. Every time he said, "I developed," or "my system," I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The executives were impressed. I could see it on their faces. Jennifer Martinez kept nodding and making notes. Our CFO called it game-changing. The vice president of operations asked how quickly it could be implemented. When someone asked a detailed technical question about the algorithm's learning mechanism, David looked momentarily panicked. Then he smiled and gestured to me. Chloe can probably speak to the technical minutia better than I can. Chloe, want to field that one? I should have said something right then. I should have stood up and told everyone the truth. Instead, I quietly answered the question in 30 seconds and let David take back control. The board approved the project unanimously. They authorized a $1 million budget for full implementation. As we left the conference room, David put his hand on my shoulder and told me I'd done great support work. I went back to my desk and sat there for 2 hours, staring at my computer screen, trying to process what had just happened. The following Monday, a company-wide email went out from Jennifer Martinez. The subject line was, "Congratulations to our newest vice president." I opened it with shaking hands. I'm thrilled to announce the promotion of David Chen to Vice President of Analytics and Innovation. David's visionary leadership and groundbreaking work on Project Chimera demonstrates the kind of forward-thinking talent that makes TechCorp an industry leader. His innovative predictive analytics system will transform how we approach market strategy. Please join me in congratulating David on this well-deserved promotion. My name appeared nowhere in the email. Not in a footnote, not in a thank you. Nowhere. I read it 5 times, each time hoping I'd somehow missed seeing my name. I hadn't. David sent a department-wide email an hour later, thanking everyone for their support and saying he looked forward to leading the team to even greater innovations. He copied Jennifer Martinez. I felt like I was going to be sick. That afternoon, I marched to David's office. He was packing up his things, getting ready to move to the executive floor. When he saw me in his doorway, he gave me that same smooth smile he always used. "Chloe, hey, exciting times, right? You took credit for my work." My voice was shaking. Project Chimera was mine. Every single line of code, every algorithm, every innovation. I built it from nothing. You told me I'd get credit. David's smile didn't fade. He sat down and gestured for me to close the door. When I did, his voice dropped to a quieter, almost paternal tone. "Chloe, I understand you're feeling overlooked right now, but you need to understand how business works at this level. Yes, you did excellent technical work. Nobody's denying that. But technical work is just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Strategy, vision, execution, risk management, stakeholder communication. Those are the things that turn a good idea into a successful initiative. That's what I brought to the table. That's what leadership is. You didn't bring anything to the table. You didn't write a single line of code. You didn't develop the methodology. You didn't even understand how it works. I provided strategic oversight and executive direction," he said smoothly. "I made the critical decisions about how to position this to the board. I got it approved. Without my involvement, your little side project would still be sitting on your laptop. You should be thanking me, honestly. This is going to be huge for your career, too." How? How is this huge for my career when nobody even knows I built it? People who matter. I know. The value of being a team player and supporting successful initiatives is sometimes more important than individual recognition. You're young. You'll learn that. Right now, the best thing you can do is continue doing great technical work and let me worry about the big picture stuff. That's what I'm good at. I stared at him, realizing that he actually believed what he was saying. In his mind, he'd earned this promotion. He'd convinced himself that his strategic vision was just as valuable as 6 months of my nights and weekends. Maybe more valuable. "This isn't right, David." He stood up, and his expression finally hardened. "Chloe, I'm going to give you some advice. You can either be bitter about this and damage your reputation, or you can be smart and ride this wave with me. I'm going to need a strong technical lead for Project Chimera's implementation. That could be you, with a nice raise and a senior analyst title, Or it could be someone else, and you can keep doing your regular work. Your choice. But if you go around making accusations and trying to undermine me, I promise you, it won't end well. Nobody likes a troublemaker who can't function as part of a team. It wasn't quite a threat, but it was close enough. I left his office without another word. That night, I went home and wrote a resignation letter. I was done. I'd find another job somewhere that valued actual merit instead of corporate game playing. I'd leave Tech Corp in the rearview mirror and never think about David Chen again. I had the letter finished by midnight. It was professional and vague, just thanking them for the opportunity and saying I was pursuing other directions. I planned to hand it in the next morning, but I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about David in his new corner office. I thought about him presenting my work at industry conferences. I thought about him building his entire career on something I'd created while I skulked away to start over somewhere else. Around 3 a.m, I got up and opened my laptop. I pulled up the Project Chimera files and started scrolling through thousands of lines of code. My code. 6 months of my life distilled into algorithms and functions. I'd built something extraordinary, something that would change the company's future, and I was just going to walk away and let David keep it? Something cold and clear settled over me. It wasn't anger anymore. It was calculation. I deleted my resignation letter. If David wanted to claim Project Chimera as his achievement, fine. But I was going to make sure the whole world knew the truth. And I was going to do it in the most public, most undeniable way possible. I started planning. The company's annual conference was scheduled for early July in Las Vegas. It was the biggest event of TechCorp's year, a massive 3-day gathering of every employee, major clients, industry press, and investors. Over 5,000 people attended. It was where major announcements were made and rising stars were showcased. I checked the preliminary agenda that had been circulated in May. Sure enough, David was listed as a keynote speaker on day 2. The topic was Innovation and Vision, How TechCorp is Predicting the Future. He was going to present Project Chimera on the biggest stage the company had. Perfect! I had 2 months to prepare. First, I needed ironclad evidence that Project Chimera was entirely my work. I went through everything systematically. I compiled every project file, and the metadata showed clearly that I was the sole creator and editor. My username was on every single document, with timestamps stretching back to November. I gathered every email I'd sent David with updates and questions. Reading through them was almost funny. His responses were always brief and non-committal. Looks good, or keep me posted, or interesting approach. It was obvious he hadn't understood any of it. I found the original email where I'd first proposed the idea to him and his dismissive response calling it a theoretical exercise. I found the email where I'd sent him the completed prototype. I documented every single hour I'd logged working on it, all outside my normal work hours. All on my personal laptop initially, before I'd moved it to company servers in March. I reached out to 3 junior analysts who I'd mentored during the project, asking them to write brief statements about my work. I was careful not to tell them why I needed it. I just said I was documenting the project development for my own records. All 3 sent me emails confirming that I'd taught them techniques I'd developed for Chimera, and that they'd seen me working on it constantly. By mid-June, I had a digital folder with over 200 pieces of evidence. If anyone questioned whether Project Chimera was my work, I could bury them in proof. But evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed something dramatic, something that couldn't be ignored or explained away, something that would expose David in real time, in front of everyone who mattered. That's when I came up with the Trojan horse. Project Chimera's presentation included a live demonstration of the system. David would be showing how it analyzed real-time data and generated predictions. The The demonstration ran through a web-based interface I'd built. I still had full administrative access to the system's back-end code. I created a hidden trigger, a piece of code that would lie dormant until activated by a very specific phrase. When someone spoke that exact phrase during the demonstration, it would override whatever was currently on the screen and display a new slide. A slide that read, Project Chimera, solely developed by Chloe Reid. Ask me about the source code. The trigger phrase needed to be something I could naturally work into a question during the Q&A session, but specific enough that it wouldn't accidentally activate. After testing dozens of options, I settled on this: iterative feedback loop in the primary algorithm. It was technical enough that it sounded like a legitimate question, but specific enough that nobody would accidentally say those exact words in that exact order. I buried the code deep in the system architecture where no one would find it during routine checks. I tested it a dozen times on a cloned version of the system to make sure it worked perfectly. It did. The moment the trigger phrase was detected through the microphone input, the override would engage. The slide would appear for 60 seconds before the system returned to normal. 60 seconds was long enough for everyone to see it, for photos to be taken, for the moment to become undeniable. I set it up 3 weeks before the conference. Then I waited. July arrived. The company chartered planes to fly everyone to Las Vegas. The conference was held at the Venetian, in a massive ballroom that could hold thousands of people. I'd never been to the annual conference before. I usually avoided optional company events. But this year, I made sure my registration was submitted early. I flew out on a Monday afternoon. The conference officially started Tuesday morning with opening remarks from Jennifer Martinez. David's keynote was scheduled for Wednesday afternoon at 2 p.m. in the main ballroom. I spent Tuesday attending random sessions and workshops, trying to keep my mind occupied. I barely heard anything the speaker said. I kept mentally rehearsing my question, making sure I had the trigger phrase exactly right. I practiced keeping my voice calm and steady. I imagined David's face when the slide appeared. That night, I couldn't eat dinner. My stomach was twisted in knots. I lay in my hotel room, staring at the ceiling again, wondering if I was about to make the biggest mistake of my life. What if the code didn't work? What if David somehow talked his way out of it? What if everyone thought I was just a disgruntled employee making false accusations? But then I thought about David's smug face in his office, telling me to be a team player. I thought about 6 months of my life stolen and packaged as his achievement. I thought about spending the next 20 years watching people like David climb over people like me. I wasn't going to back down. Wednesday morning crawled by. I attended a morning session on data visualization that I couldn't focus on. I had lunch alone in my hotel room because I was too nervous to eat in public. At 1 p.m., I went down to the ballroom. The space was enormous. The main floor had rows of chairs for probably 3,000 people, and there were 2 balcony levels that added another 2,000 seats. A massive stage dominated the front, with 2 huge screens on either side showing the TechCorp logo. The production value was incredible. Professional lighting, multiple cameras, a sound system that probably cost more than my annual salary. People were already filing in, excited and chatting. I found a seat in the 3rd row, slightly left of center, close enough to reach a microphone quickly during Q&A, but not so close that I'd stand out before then. The room filled up fast. By the time the lights dimmed at 2 p.m., every seat was taken and people were standing in the back. Jennifer Martinez took the stage first to introduce David. She gave a glowing introduction, talking about his vision and leadership. She mentioned Project Chimera specifically, calling it the most exciting innovation in TechCorp's 15-year history. The crowd applauded. Then David walked out. He looked perfect, of course. Expensive charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, TechCorp blue tie. His hair was styled flawlessly. He had a wireless headset microphone and a small remote for advancing slides. He smiled and waved as the applause continued. He looked like he'd been born to stand on that stage. I felt my hands clench into fists. The applause died down and David began speaking. Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you all for being here today. I want to talk to you about the future. Not the future we hope for, or the future we dream about, but the future we can actually predict. He clicked his remote, and the screens changed to the Project Chimera title slide. My title slide, the one I designed 6 months ago. For the past year, I've been developing a revolutionary new system called Project Chimera. A year! He'd extended the timeline to make it sound like he'd been working on it longer. I hadn't even started until November. He launched into his presentation, clicking through slides I'd created. He talked about his approach to machine learning and his innovative methodology. He showed graphs of the back-testing results, pointing to the 87% accuracy rate like it was his personal achievement. He made it sound visionary and exciting, I had to admit. The crowd was eating it up. Watching him was torture. Every slide felt like another theft. Every time he said, "I built," or "my system," I wanted to scream. But I stayed quiet. I kept my face neutral. I waited. His presentation lasted 45 minutes. He concluded with a dramatic demonstration of the system working in real time, showing how it was analyzing current market data and generating predictions. The crowd was impressed. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. People stood up. David smiled and gave a small bow. Jennifer Martinez returned to the stage with a handheld microphone. That was fantastic, David. I know we have some time for questions. I see we have microphones set up in the aisles. Who has a question for our newest VP? This was it. I stood up immediately and walked to the microphone in the left aisle. There were already 3 people lined up behind me, but I'd gotten there first. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Jennifer pointed to me. Yes, let's start here. A production assistant brought me a microphone. The spotlight swung toward me. On the giant screens, I could see myself, looking small and nervous. 5,000 people were looking at me. David was still on stage, smiling, looking relaxed and confident. I took a breath and spoke clearly into the microphone. Thank you for that presentation, David. I have a technical question about the system architecture. Could you explain how the iterative feedback loop in the primary algorithm handles null-value datasets without corrupting the predictive model? I'd done it. I'd said the trigger phrase exactly right. For about 3 seconds, nothing happened. David started to answer, opening his mouth to say something. Then, the screens flickered. His final slide disappeared. In its place, in massive white letters on a black background, appeared my message. Project Chimera, solely developed by Chloe Reid. Ask me about the source code. The ballroom fell completely silent. Everyone was staring at the screens. Then people started looking at David, then at me, then back at the screens. I could hear whispers starting, confused murmurs spreading through the crowd. David had frozen on stage, staring at the screens with his mouth half open. His face had gone pale. He looked at the remote in his hand and clicked it frantically, trying to change the slide. Nothing happened. The message stayed up. Jennifer Martinez stood up from her seat in the front row, looking shocked. The 60 seconds felt like an eternity. I stood at the microphone, still holding it, watching the chaos unfold. People were taking photos with their phones. The whispers were getting louder. I could see executives in the front rows turning to each other with confused expressions. Finally, the system reset itself, and the screens returned to normal, showing the TechCorp logo. David found his voice. There seems to be a technical glitch in the system. That's obviously some kind of error. Let me address your question about the feedback loop. The architecture is designed to filter out null values through a process of systematic elimination, and he was floundering. He had no idea what he was talking about. I spoke again, my voice calm and clear. You can't answer that question, can you, David? Because you didn't design the feedback loop. You didn't design any of it. The ballroom erupted in noise. Everyone was talking at once. Jennifer Martinez was walking quickly toward the stage. Security guards were moving toward my position, probably to escort me out. But before they reached me, I kept talking. My name is Chloe Reed. I'm a senior data analyst in David's department. I spent 6 months developing Project Chimera entirely on my own time. Every line of code, every algorithm, every innovation you just saw presented was solely my work. I have extensive documentation proving this, including original project files with metadata, email records, and testimony from colleagues. David presented my work to the executive board without my permission and took full credit for it. He got promoted based on work he didn't do. The security guards had stopped, uncertain. Jennifer Martinez had reached the stage and was talking urgently to David. His face had gone from pale to red. On the screens, the cameras were still showing me at the microphone, and my face was projected 20 feet high for everyone to see. Jennifer took David's microphone from him and spoke into it. I think we need to take a brief pause here and sort this situation out. Let's take a 15-minute break. But the damage was done. The ballroom was in complete chaos. Everyone was talking, pointing, taking photos and videos. I could see industry press representatives in the press section, frantically typing on laptops. This wasn't just going to be company gossip. This was going to be news. 2 security guards approached me, but they weren't aggressive. One of them spoke quietly. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us, please." I nodded and followed them out of the ballroom. As I walked up the aisle, I could feel 5,000 pairs of eyes on me. Some people were applauding. I heard someone shout, "Get him, Chloe!" They took me to a small conference room backstage and asked me to wait. I sat down at the table, my hands still shaking with adrenaline. I'd done it. 20 minutes later, Jennifer Martinez entered the room alone. She closed the door behind her and sat down across from me. Her expression was unreadable. "That was quite a dramatic accusation, Ms. Reed." "It's not an accusation. It's the truth. And I can prove every word." "I certainly hope so, because what you just did was incredibly risky. If you're wrong, your career is over. If you're right..." She trailed off, looking at me intently. "I have over 200 pieces of documentation," I said. "Project files, emails, timestamps, witness statements, code repositories. Everything that proves Project Chimera was solely my work from start to finish." David had no involvement beyond receiving status updates he didn't understand. "I can show you all of it right now." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "Send everything to my personal email address in the next hour. All of it. I'm going to review it personally with our legal team and our head of IT. We'll verify the code authorship and the metadata. If what you're saying is true, this is a serious matter." "It's true." She stood up. "Wait here. Someone will be with you shortly." She left. I pulled out my laptop and started sending files to her email address. It took 40 minutes to upload everything to a secure shared folder and send her the link. While I waited, I could hear the muffled chaos continuing outside. The conference had obviously not resumed. Around 5 p.m., the head of HR and TechCorp's general counsel came into the room. They asked me to walk them through the entire situation from the beginning. I did, calmly and methodically. I showed them specific files and emails. I answered every question they had. The interview lasted 3 hours. Finally, around 8 p.m., they told me I could go back to my hotel but needed to remain available. The conference was officially suspended for the rest of the day. They would contact me in the morning. I went back to my room, ordered room service that I still couldn't eat, and collapsed on the bed. I'd either just saved my career or destroyed it. There was no middle ground now. The next morning, my phone started ringing at 7 a.m. It was Jennifer Martinez's assistant, asking me to come to a meeting in the executive suite at 9. I showered, put on my best professional outfit, and went upstairs. The executive suite was full of people. Jennifer, the general counsel, the head of HR, the head of IT, and 3 other executives I recognized from the board meeting where David had stolen my presentation. Jennifer gestured for me to sit. We spent most of the night reviewing your evidence and conducting our own investigation. We examined the code repositories, the file metadata, the email records, and we interviewed several of your colleagues. We also had detailed conversations with David. I held my breath. Everything you said checks out. The Project Chimera system was developed solely by you, with no meaningful contribution from David Chen. The code authorship is unambiguous. Your username is on every file. The timestamps confirm your timeline. Your colleagues corroborated that you were the sole developer. David was unable to answer basic technical questions about the system's architecture. Relief flooded through me so intensely I felt dizzy. Jennifer continued, her voice hard. What David did was unconscionable. He violated company policy, he committed fraud in his communications with the executive board, and he damaged TechCorp's integrity. He's been terminated, effective immediately. He's being escorted out of the hotel as we speak, and his access to all company systems has been revoked. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. I owe you a personal apology, Chloe. I pride myself on recognizing talent and merit, and I completely failed you. You created something extraordinary, and instead of being celebrated for it, you were exploited. That's on me for not doing my due diligence. Thank you, I managed to say. The question now is how we move forward. Project Chimera is still a revolutionary system, and TechCorp still needs to implement it. We need someone to lead that implementation, someone who actually understands how it works. The VP position David held is now vacant. She paused and looked directly at me. I'd like to offer you that position, Vice President of Analytics and Innovation, reporting directly to me. You'd lead a team of 20 analysts and engineers. Your starting salary would be $240,000 plus equity and performance bonuses. You'd have full control over Project Chimera's implementation and expansion. I stared at her, unable to process what I was hearing. I know this is sudden, Jennifer continued. And I know you've been through hell. You don't have to answer right now. Take a few days to think about it. But I didn't need a few days. I'd spent 6 months building something extraordinary and then watched it get stolen. I'd spent 2 months planning my revenge down to the last detail. I'd risked my entire career on 60 seconds of code and one perfectly timed question. I'd found my voice in the most dramatic way possible. I accept, I said. Jennifer smiled, really smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Excellent. We'll handle the paperwork when we're back in the office. For now, how do you feel about giving a keynote presentation tomorrow? I think this conference needs to hear about Project Chimera from its actual creator. My stomach flipped. Tomorrow? In front of everyone? 5,000 people who now know exactly who you are and what you built. I think they'd appreciate hearing your story. I thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. I'll do it. The next day, I stood on that massive stage where David had stood 2 days before. The ballroom was packed again, maybe even more crowded than Wednesday. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next. I gave my presentation about Project Chimera, but this time, it wasn't just about the technology. I talked about the process of creating it. I talked about the late nights and the weekends and the personal sacrifices. I talked about the joy of solving complex problems and building something from nothing. I talked about what happens when people take credit for work they didn't do and why that's not just unfair to individuals, but toxic to innovation. And I talked about finding the courage to stand up for yourself, even when it's terrifying. When I finished, the applause was deafening. People stood up. I saw several of my colleagues in the crowd, including Marcus, who'd had his work stolen by David months ago. He was clapping and grinning. During the Q&A, someone asked me if I regretted the way I'd exposed David. I thought about it carefully before answering. I don't regret making sure the truth came out. I do wish it hadn't been necessary. I wish David had just given credit where it was due. I wish I'd felt empowered to speak up earlier instead of letting it get to that point. But we can't always control other people's choices. We can only control our own responses. The conference ended on a high note. Over the next week, the story spread throughout the tech industry. Several publications ran articles about what happened. Most were sympathetic to me. A few questioned whether my method was too dramatic or unprofessional. I didn't care. The truth was out. And that was all that mattered. When I got back to the office, I moved into David's former office on the executive floor. It felt surreal. I hired a team, including 2 of the junior analysts who'd worked with me on Project Chimera. We started the full implementation rollout, and by October, it was running across the entire company. The results exceeded even my projections. By the end of the year, TechCorp's market predictions were the most accurate in the industry. We started licensing the technology to other companies. Project Chimera became the foundation for an entirely new revenue stream worth tens of millions of dollars. I got the credit I deserved. My name was on every presentation, every article, every patent filing. But the thing I'm most proud of isn't the technology. It's what happened after. In the months following the conference, 7 other employees at TechCorp came forward with their own stories of having their work stolen, or their contributions erased by managers who took credit they didn't deserve. The company implemented new policies to prevent it from happening again. Code repositories now had automatic authorship tracking. Project documentation had to include detailed contribution records. Performance reviews included feedback from peers, not just managers. The culture started to change. People felt safer speaking up. Last month, I gave my first presentation as VP at a team meeting. 20 people reporting to me, looking at me to lead them. I thought about David and his empty corporate buzzwords. I thought about how he'd managed through fear and manipulation. I decided to do the opposite. I need you all to know something, I told my team. Your work matters. Your contributions matter. Your names will be on everything you create. I will never take credit for something you built. And if I ever mess up and fail to recognize your efforts properly, I expect you to call me out on it. You have my permission to walk into my office and demand the credit you deserve. One of the junior analysts raised her hand. What if we're scared to do that? I smiled. Then remember that I once hid code in a system that exposed my lying manager in front of 5,000 people. If I can do that, you can absolutely tell me when I'm wrong. Everyone laughed. The tension in the room broke. As I sit here now, 9 months after that conference in Las Vegas, I sometimes think about the risk I took. Embedding that Trojan horse code was absolutely a gamble. If it hadn't worked, or if I hadn't been able to prove my case, I would have been fired and probably blacklisted from the industry. It could have gone very differently. But I also think about what would have happened if I'd stayed silent. David would still be VP, still stealing credit, still crushing people who actually did the work. I would have quit, bitter and defeated, and spent the rest of my career wondering what might have been. Project Chimera would have been his legacy, not mine. Sometimes the safe choice is actually the riskiest one in the long run. I learned something important through all of this. Your work speaks for itself, but only if you make sure people can hear it. Being talented isn't enough. Being right isn't enough. Sometimes you have to take the microphone and make people listen. Sometimes you have to code a message into the system that literally cannot be ignored. I'm not saying everyone should do what I did. Public confrontation isn't always the answer. But silence definitely isn't either. The biggest innovation I created wasn't a predictive analytics system. It was finding my own voice and learning how to use it. I had to risk my entire career to get the credit I deserved. Was it a reckless gamble or a necessary move? Let me know what you would have done in the comments below.